In a world brimming with challenges and change, with crises all around us, we need ideas, innovation, and inspiration. Welcome to the Free Market Roadshow 2024, where the pulse of contemporary discussions beats.
Dobro jutro svima. I wish a good morning to everyone. Nice to see you in this rainy morning. First, I would like to thank to Croatian Catholic University for hosting us our great event here in their best hall, named after our COC patron, Cardinal Stepinac. We at the Center for the Renewal of Culture were very happy when our partners from Vienna Austrian Economic Center asked us, could we host the winners of the essay contest, Ideas Have Consequences, which was organized for students in Ukraine on the topic Economic Recovery of Ukraine. We in Croatia had our own experience of living through a war of aggression against us. This led to a massive destruction and death and the disruption of the whole country. So we understand what Ukraine is living through now. We also understand that after a war there is a great task of rebuilding to do. This requires courage and intelligence. We have gone a long way in rebuilding Croatia, and we hope that ideas put forward by our young guests today will help rebuild Ukraine after its war has ended. Today with us we have First Secretary of the Ukrainian Embassy in Croatia, His Excellency Dmytro Horba. He will say later a few words. Then we have two presentations by Miro Kovač, our Foreign Minister of Republic of Croatia and a professor at the University of North. After Mr. Kovač, we will have Đuro Vidmarović, who was a former ambassador of Croatia to Ukraine and president of Croatia-Ukraine Friendship Society. And then after our guests, we will have the presentation of two winning essays, plus a few questions and answers by Ms. Daria Chernenko from Odesa Mechnikov National University and Anastasia Ahtemenko from Odesa State Agrarian University. So first I would like to invite Mr. First Secretary.
Excuse me. It doesn't work, right? Okay, on behalf of the Embassy of Ukraine, I would like to warmly welcome you today at this conference, and also I would like to thank for organizers, for Center for Renewal of Culture and Austrian Economic Center for organizing this event, which is really important for us, for our country. Also, I would like to thank the Croatian Catholic University for hosting the event. And it would be really interesting to hear today's presentations. Of course, I'm looking forward to hear the presentations of our contest winners, and congratulations. But also, I'm really pleased to be here today with His Excellency Mr. Kovač and His Excellency Mr. Vidmarović to follow their presentations, taking into account their high-level expertise and experience and knowledge. Also, what should I say? The topic that we've chosen today to discuss is really important. It's hard to overestimate its importance. There is no country without strong economy, and when we're talking about Ukraine, which suffers from the war of aggression, from the terrorist state, which is Russia, we really need support in restoring of our economy, because without this, all other spheres won't be able to recover. You know that the real terrorist, Russia's shelling and destroying civilian objects, civilian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and it's really important to rebuild everything which the main key to encourage people to come back to their homes and to participate in the further restoration of the country. I've seen, when I look through the today's agenda, I've seen that our winners are from the regions that suffers from the airstrikes of Russia. When we talk about Odesa, you know that there Russia destroys the port infrastructure, our storage facilities, which affects not only Ukraine but also other countries who waits for the products from our country. And when we're talking about Kherson, unfortunately the part of the region is still under occupation. I've been to this city after their liberation, and it's really hard to see the destroyed buildings, and I hope that soon we'll be able to restore everything. Also, while talking about recovery, I need to say that we're not waiting for the end of the war to start this process. It's ongoing. We're trying to restore infrastructure on the liberated territories, and of course, after the end of the war, it will be the main idea for our country. I hope, I'm really happy that we have so talented youth with such great ideas, and I hope that when it will be safe in Ukraine, they will participate by themselves in implementation of their ideas and their projects. So once again, thank you very much for being here today with you, and wish you to have a really fruitful conference. Thank you.
Dobar dan. I'm supposed to speak in English, although I'm a Croatian. So I was forced by Mr. Mate Ćurić to speak in English. Ne osjećam se baš najbolje zbog toga. Pod budnim okom sam gospodina Vidakovića, kaže, ne bi sebe smjeli govoriti na engleskom jeziku u Hrvatskoj, ali ipak ćemo to učiniti. Drago mi je tu gospodin Vidmarović, drago mi je da je tu i prvi tajnik veleposlanstva Ukrajine, i naš gospodin Robin Harris, i sve vas ostale vrlo srdačno pozdravljam. Okay, so let's start now, let's switch to English. I will speak about Ukraine and Russia's aggression against Ukraine in a geopolitical context. Okay, I will first speak about the motivations of Russia to attack Ukraine, what is behind. It's of course my point of view. Secondly, then the global context. Then the US strategy. What is in fact the US strategy? How do Americans look at the war in Ukraine? How do they act? And then the future of Ukraine. So let's start with Russia's approach to Ukraine. In 1990, Solzhenitsyn wrote a long article in Komsomolskaya Pravda about how he sees the future of Russia. Okay, it was translated into English, and in English the title is Rebuilding Russia, but in Russian it is Как нам обустроить Россию. And we speak Croatian, so we understand some Russian and Ukrainian. So that would mean kako prestроiti Rusiju. Kako presložiti, kako prestrojiti Rusiju. How to rearrange Russia. Okay? And he writes in 1990, in September 1990, that the Soviet Union should be dismembered, and that only 3 republics and a part of Kazakhstan should stay in a Russian state. Okay? And those 3 republics were, according to Solzhenitsyn, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. Because according to that mindset, you have the Russians, Veliki Rusi, you have the Ukrainians, and you have Mali Rusi, white Russians. That's the idea behind. Okay? So what Putin does, in fact, is not to rebuild the Soviet Union. The idea of Putin and of his entourage is to rebuild a Russian empire. And there is a very important adjective which we do not have in the Croatian language, nor do we have it in the English language. It is in the Russian language you have Ruski and you have Rossiyski. So in German you would translate into Russländisch, okay? So Russländisch, Russländische Föderation, not Ruska Föderation, not Russische Föderation, Russländische Föderation. So it's a concept which is wider. It's not only an ethnic concept, it's an imperial concept. Okay. So according to that concept, Ukraine has to stay with Russia. That's the basic idea of the Russians, the Russian imperialists and Putin. So the idea was not of Russia in the beginning to occupy Ukraine and to destroy Ukraine. The idea was the model of Belarus. So Ukraine has to stay with us. Ukraine doesn't have the right to separate itself from Russia because it belongs to the Rossiyski Mir. That's the idea. And then, of course, on the other hand, you have the population in Ukraine, you have the Ukrainians who wanted independence and who decided to join the West. And the Russians, led by Putin, decided not to allow the Ukrainians to become part of the West, meaning part of NATO, part of the European Union. That is the basic idea. Of course, the Americans and we, the West, the European Union, we were in favor of seeing a new country getting closer to us. The Russians were quite weak in the 90s. They couldn't really fight against the idea of the West to allow Ukraine to become a part of the West, so they couldn't really act. But with this energy policy, which was pursued by Putin, by the way, he defended a doctoral thesis at the end of the 90s in economy, where he defended the idea of making Russia strong by using resources, especially in the energy sector. So Russia became quite strong 10, 15 years ago again, and then launched this first aggression against Ukraine in 2014. Okay? Once again, the idea was not to occupy Ukraine. The idea was what Milosevic had done in Croatia, to use people in Ukraine who felt that they were close to the Russian ethnicity, to stop Ukraine from becoming part of the West. So Milosevic, he did the same in Croatia with the Serbs in Croatia. They were used by him to prevent Croatia from becoming independent, an independent state. The problem of the West, and I said it in Washington in 2015, was that it did not act efficiently in 2014. Because if we had sent forces in 2015 to Ukraine, peacekeeping forces, we wouldn't have had this second aggression 2 years ago. That was a big mistake of the West. Well, now it's too late. And what we have today, of course, is we have a war of attrition. We have many victims in Ukraine because of the Russian occupying forces in Ukraine. We do not really witness that the West, led by the US, is motivated enough sufficiently to fight back in a way that Ukraine liberates itself and liberates the occupied territories. These are the facts. And now, why is that so? Now we're switching to the global context. For the Americans, now since, I would say, 2015, 16, 17, I started in 2011, 12, under Obama, there was a shift. Until then, the Americans had their priority when it comes to foreign policy in Europe. Europe was number one. And then came the rest. Now there's a shift. China has become very strong economically, militarily, and we have the famous phrase by Obama and the idea, pivot to Asia. It started in 2011, and it was clearly defined by the Trump administration in 2017 in the national security strategy. There are two competitors for the Americans. It is confirmed by the Biden administration. The Americans see two competitors. On the one hand, China, which is the only power in the world which has the potential to create things in the world order. And then you have the Russians, which do not have the power to create the world, or to contribute to creating the world order, but who can be a destabilizing factor when it comes to upholding the order which was imposed by the Americans and the Allies after World War II. So that is the American view of the world. So the priority for the Americans is China. How to compete with China. And when we speak about China, we have Taiwan. That is the basic priority of the Americans when we speak about the world order. Ukraine is a second priority, because Europe has become, as we said, less important. Europe, now we have the Indo-Pacific region, which is number one for the Americans, and then comes Europe. And then comes the Middle East, and then the rest. Africa, South America. Because South America, North America is only one big power, the Americans. Africa, Chinese are there, the Russians, but still the Americans, controlled from Stuttgart, okay? Africa. So China, in the Pacific region, and then comes Europe. And that explains how the Americans act. Because if you look at how the Americans act, we will see three things, three aspects of America's policy when it comes to Ukraine. First thing, how to avoid a Russian victory. The Americans want to avoid that the Russians win the war against the Russian war, the aggression against Ukraine. Why? Because of China and because of Taiwan. Because if that should happen, and it will not happen, I'm convinced it will not happen, that would be a very bad signal. It would show the Chinese that they could do the same with Taiwan. That there would be no intervention from the US to stop the Americans, to stop the Chinese from taking over Taiwan. Not today, not tomorrow, but in a couple of years perhaps, you never know. Second idea of the Americans, second goal, is to avoid an escalation, a nuclear war. They do not want a nuclear escalation with the Russians. This is also what the Russians want to avoid. So no escalation, no nuclear war with the Russians. By the way, if that happened, that war would take place where? In Europe. Not in the US, not in China. Here, in Central Europe, logically. If you look at the plans of the Americans and the Russians in the 70s and the 80s, it was in Central Europe. Third aspect of the US policy when it comes to Ukraine is to make the Europeans more responsible for the security in Europe. So the Europeans should take over. And the Americans, I would say, have succeeded in imposing that view on the Europeans, and we have more or less, one or two exceptions, I would say, in the European Union, we have a strong solidarity with the US when it comes to Ukraine. Why do the Americans want the Europeans to be more engaged? It's very easy to explain. Because of the Americans' interest to focus on China. The war of Israel against Hamas is a problem for the US. What happened between Iran and Israel, the drones, basically half of the drones were intercepted from Iran by the Americans. So they have to spend their resources on Ukraine, they have to spend their resources on Israel, while of course they want to be focused on China. And as we said, China is the only power in the world that can challenge America's dominance in world policy and the idea of the Americans to uphold the current order. So what does that mean for Ukraine? It means for Ukraine, first of all, that Ukraine will not lose, because the Ukrainians will fight, of course, and they fight very courageously, but it will not lose because of the West and the Americans, because the Americans cannot allow themselves, I wouldn't count so much upon the Europeans, unfortunately, not here, not upon the Croatians or the Czechs, but unfortunately, if you look at our friends in the old member states, they're not really motivated for being more engaged. Looking at our friends in Germany and in France, spend a lot of money on Ukraine, but that not really motivated to engage themselves in upholding a just European order. So the Ukrainians will not lose because of the Americans, who cannot allow themselves that the Russians win in the war against Ukraine. It's very clear. Secondly, the Europeans will stay engaged, and they will compensate for the lack of engagement when it comes to military intervention by taking over Ukraine's recovery. So the European Union will most probably invest a lot of money in Ukraine to rebuild the country. And the European Union has also proved that it will accept in the near future Ukraine as a member of the European Union. It's a compensation for not having acted more efficiently in the past. What will happen with NATO and membership NATO, difficult to say. But I see, because it depends upon the Americans, NATO membership. But when it comes to EU membership, I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist when it comes to recovery. Ukraine has a big potential, but if you look at the GDP of Ukraine, 2 years ago, before Russia's aggression, it was comparable to the GDP of Berlin, of the land of Berlin in Germany, 167 billion euros approximately. So, to conclude, I'm an optimist for Ukraine. How things will develop when it comes to possible peace negotiations, what is the best strategy for Ukraine, how to continue, difficult to say for me, because I cannot take over the responsibility for Ukraine to make any suggestions, to give any piece of advice. but I would like Ukraine to become, formally speaking, a member of the West, and I'm sure it will become a member of the West. I'm not so sure about how we can find a way to stop the Russians from advancing on the ground in the Donetsk Oblast right now. And I can only say that I'm not happy about our fellow Europeans for not having understood on time that it is up to us in Europe to be responsible for creating a just order on our continent. And we should now use that opportunity with the Americans to make a new deal with the Americans to say, we will be in charge when it comes to European security. We will not speak about autonomie stratégique, as the French like to do it. We will act. We will act. And that will help you, the Americans, to be more efficient when it comes to dealing with China and Russia. Thank you so much. Zahvaljujem. Hvala lijepa.
Poštovani gospodine Ćurić, poštovani kolega Kovač, veľmi šanovne panočke, vy prišli z Odese, vy z Hersona. Я був як посол там, це прекрасні городи, мені болить серце, коли бачу на тебе, як бомбою, і що вони роблять тут прекраснoj Odesi. Ja ću predavati ili govorit ću na hrvatskom jeziku, jako bi bilo mi drago trohi rozmовляти українською, гарною, нашу прекрасною українською мовою, ali bude prilika. Ja sam predsjednik Hrvatsko-Ukrajinskog društva prijateljstva, bivši veleposlanik, bivši predsjednik društva hrvatskih književnika i govorit ću vam sada kao, recimo, slobodan hrvatski intelektualac i književnik, je sve što je bivše nema baš veliko značenje, dakle ne možemo govoriti u ničije ime. To bi mogao samo upravo saborski zastupnik Bartulica, dakle, koji ima iza sebe jednu stranku. Kao veleposlanik sam došao u Ukrajinu upravo kada se na neki način osjećala stabilizacija, to je 66. godine, a u Hrvatskoj još je tekao proces reintegracije okupiranih područja u istočnoj Slavoniji. Drugi put sam bio na dan kada je Rusija anektirala Krim. Pozorno sam pratio zbivanja u Ukrajini i još kao veleposlanik sam uočio i bilo mi jasno da će prije ili kasnije doći do ove eksplozije i ovog krvavog rata. Jer u moje vrijeme na Krimu je bio snažan separatistički pokret, čak su jednog predsjednika izabrali, dakle pokušaj da se na mirni način odvoje. Recimo, paradoksalno i vrijeme su prilagodili na Krimu moskovsko, a ne srednje europsko. Sve je ukazivalo da tako stanje neodrživo. U Kijevu niste mogli kupiti novine na ukrajinskom jeziku. Knjige sa Petrivke, vi znate da je u Kijevu se velika trgovina Petrivka, bahato ruski knjig. Dakle, preplavili su ukrajinsko tržište. I onda nakon aneksije Krima, a pisao sam o tome u svojim knjigama, pitao sam se, Rusija je anektirala 1/3 Moldavije u to vrijeme. Siromašne zemlje koja nikoga nije ugrožavala, niti je mogla ugroziti, samo zbog 14. armije. Anektirala je bogatu, turistički vrijednu pokrajinu Gruzije, Abhaziju. Nikoga Gruzija nije ugrožavala. Anektirala je Južnu Osetiju. Svijet je šutio. Zapadni demokratski svijet. Nakon Krima, gledao sam, Zapad je šutio. Krenulo se na Lugansku i Donjecku oblast. Ukrajina je bila tada, dakle, pred slomom i prisiljena je bila na pregovore u Minsku, koji su bili vrlo nepovoljni za nju. Očekivalo se što će svijet učiniti sa tom velikom zemljom koja je željela samo uključivanje u euroatlantske integracijske procese, ulazak u Europsku uniju i demokraciju po obrascima zapadne uljudbe. Ništa više, osloboditi se ruskog knuta i patronata. Naravno, rat je bio neizbježan nakon što je Januković pao. Januković, to mnogi ne znaju kod nas, dakle, bio jedan proruska marioneta tamo. A pao je kada je ukrajinska mladež na Majdanu Nezaležnosti, na Greščatiku, svojom krvlju zaustavljala Berkutovce i Omonovce, koji su ih gađali kao golubove. I tada je došlo do preokreta. I šta, mnogi kod nas to ne znaju, i to ću vam kazati, niti sam ja ikada pozvan na ove govoriti na televiziji. Dakle, premda sam o tome, a govorili su mnogi koji ne znaju ukrajinski jezik, ne poznaju ukrajinsku kulturu. To je samo znak i te perforacije ukrajinske kulture kod nas, odnosno diplomacije pa i obavještajne zajednice. Govoriti o televiziji, o ukrajinskoj situaciji, ne znam, uz puno poštovanja ambasador Hrvatske u Rusiji. O ukrajinskoj situaciji. A mi koji smo živi, koji smo bili tamo i koji znademo. Dakle, sad se situacija, nažalost, mijenja i trebalo je preko hrvatsko-ukrajinskog društva mijenjati situaciju, dati našoj javnosti do znanja što se zbiva u toj zemlji. Ruska propaganda je bila strašna. Demantirati da je to nacistički režim. Demantirati da su zapravo Rusi, ne postoji ukrajinski narod, nego malo Rusi velikog, ne postoji ukrajinski jezik, dijalekt malo ruski velikog ukrajinskog jezika. Obraniti povijest. Naziv Rus obraniti koji je kod nas bilo nejasan. Što je Rus, što je Rosija, ta zbunjenost fonetska, što je Rus sa apostrofom, što je bez apostrofa. I danas da pitate naše novinare koji pišu o tome što je Rus sa apostrofom, što je bez apostrofa, neće znati. A to je veliko, to je stvar identiteta jednog naroda. I niz takvih stvari koje je trebalo pisati i objašnjavati upravo kod nas, jer naime ruska literatura, rusko novinarstvo preplavilo je i naš medijski prostor i hvala Bogu i ovakva jedna konferencija pridonosi tome da se stvari raščiste. Ja sam pisao i naš je stav, dalje te neću duljiti. Dakle, Rusija je napadom na Ukrajinu srušila međunarodni pravni poredak. Srušila je definitivno povelju Ujedinjenih nacija i povelju Kesa. Posebno povelju UN-a koja je stvorena nakon Hitlerove povijesne avanture da se nikad više to ne ponovi. Koja garantira da svaki narod, svaka država ima pravo na nepovredivost svojih granica i suvereniteta. Srušuje Budimpeštanski sporazum koji je garantirao Ukrajini puni suverenitet ako se odrekne svog atomskog oružja i ako ga dislocira na teritoriji gdje Ruske federacije. Ja sam promatrao te velike interkontinentalne rakete kako se transportiraju za Rusiju. Sada te iste prijete Ukrajini i tako dalje. Dakle, to je sve pod agendom takozvanog zapadnog svijeta. I tu je grijeh istočni tog zapadnog svijeta. I kada je trebala isto tako, treba kazati, Putin postupa kao fašistički diktator. Njegovo je, dakle, on vodi rat genocidno. On provodi u Ukrajini genocid, urbocid i kulturocid. Buča je prekrasno mjesto, cijelo je srušeno, svi su ljudi poubijeni. Kao u Srebrenici. Da ne govorimo o drugim mjestima gdje sam bio, Donjecko i tako dalje. Kulturocid. Pogledajte na karti odakle su protjerani stanovnici. Stavite tamo zvijezdice crvene. To je teritorij koji na kartama koje možete naći ponekad na internetu prikazuje kao buduću veliku Rusiju. Odatle se protjeruje ukrajinska pučanstvo da bi se naselila budući neka nova populacija. A taj teritorij se poklapa s teritorijem gladomora. Gdje je 32. 33. 6 milijuna ljudi ubijeno. Naravno, 6 milijuna to je ispražnjen prostor. Dovedeno je novo pučanstvo gdje je za Staljina nacionalni problem bio transportni. Pa oni i krimske Tatare, i Čečene, Dagestance, sve to preseli daleko na istok. Hrvatska je zauzela principijelan stav od početka prema ovom problemu. 2014. gospodin Plenković bio predsjednik u Europskoj uniji zadužen za Ukrajinu. Bio je tada u Rusiji, u Kijevu i jasan je izrazio stav Europske unije da se podržavaju eurointegracijski procesi i želje ukrajinskog naroda. Tako je ostalo do danas. U Hrvatskoj je održana Krimska konferencija, to je jedinstveni događaj, politički jedan važan događaj u svjetskim razmjerima i do danas je tako. Iako nije jednostavno, i ovdje postoji polarizacija određena i te stare snage, jer još uvijek su ponekad bučne i smetaju normalnom razvoju odnosa između dviju zemalja. Završit ću, ukrajinski narod krvari za Europu, za svijet, za demokratski svijet. Mogli bi se predati i biti kao Bjelorusi bez rata. Znadu ruski. Pa mi neki kažu, boli govore ruski. A niko ne pita zašto Irci govore engleski. Dakle, povijest je tu razlog, dakle, ali to ne ugrožava identitet, osjećaj identiteta. Dakle, Ukrajinci ginu za zapadne vrijednosti. Ukrajinci ginu da se zaštiti međunarodni pravni poredak. Ako padne Ukrajina, budite sigurni prema kartama koje Putin i njegova ekipa šalje u svijet. Prema govorima koje drži on Medvedev, recimo, ili prije Žirinovski, kad smo pozorno pratili, želi granice Rusije u granicama koje je imala carska Rusija za Katarine Velike ili Petra Velikoga, a dalje želi politički utjecaj sa snažnim utjecajem Rusije kakav je bio u doba Varšavskog pakta. A osvojiti se teritorij može vojno, ali može se i politički, može se instaliranjem petokolonaša i Quislinga. Pa već vidite kako se pomiču pojedine političke strukture u susjednim zemljama kako bi na miran način, dakle Kobajagedića pod firmom mira, ne želimo rat i tako dalje. Pa čak neke od susjednih zemalja planiraju komadanje Ukrajine ako dođe do njezinog poraza. Dakle, time je, svijet, ja smatram, sa ratom protiv Ukrajine ušao zapravo treći svjetski rat. On ne mora biti atomske bombe odmah, ali na granici je prijetnje jednog, drugoga i trećega. Dr. Kovač je jako krasno to stavio jedan svjetski kontekst, naravno, kroz koji to treba promatrati i vi mladi to morate promatrati, ali do pobjede, bez pobjede, nema ništa. Treba pobijediti neprijatelja, pobijediti bez obzira na cijenu, kao što je to bilo u Hrvatskoj. Ako ga ne pobjedite, završit ću, za 2 dana pada Moldova, već kako su zaprijetili. Budite sigurni, Baltičke republike, neće ih nikoga. Finska je u strahu, ili Putin rekao, kakva Finska? Pa to je naša gubernija. Ne govorimo o Poljskoj koja je bila dio Poljske, polovica je bila pod komandom Rusije. Slovačka previre, Mađarska, vidite kako razmišlja. U Bugarskoj, dakle, predsjednik Radev je otvoreno pro-putinovski raspoložen. I tako da je. Dragi prijatelji, evo, drage kolegice, hvala lijepa još jednom na pozivu. Ovo je samo telegramski i malo emocionalno izneseno, jer je situacija rat. To nije akademska diskusija o romanu Majstor i Margarita. Tamo se gine na 1000 ljudi, u teškim uvjetima, u oranici, u blatu, u zimi. Tamo se ruši Odesa, prekrasan grad, tamo je divna bečka secesija, tamo je kazalište poput našeg Hrvatskog narodnog kazališta. Znači, sve to treba vidjeti, ne govorimo, bombe su i Lavov razarale, koji je kao i Zagreb, jedan mitteleuropski grad sa arhitekturom, sa uljubnom socijalizacijom. U Kijevu je stvorena pismenost slavenskog naroda, ko nevjernika treba vidjeti upravo Kijevo-Pečersku lavru, katedralu Svete Sofije iz 12. stoljeća. To su veličanstvena umjetnička arhitektonska djela bez kojih nezamisliva civilizacija uopće svijeta, da ne govorimo našeg slavenskog svijeta. Evo, s te strane izražavam duboku sućut, velika spівчуття з українським народом. Я плачу кожен день і бажаю, що це ворог буде зупинити, що не може так закінчитися робота. Потрібно вільна Україна, потрібно бути вільна, як написав великий Тарас Григорович Шевченко. Хвала вам на пам'яті. Будьмо.
Good day, everyone. My name is Daria. And I'm here to ask you one question. Do you believe that all blonde girls are unintelligent or that all men love football? Well, me neither. So why don't we go beyond some other stereotypes? I'll kick off by stating a simple yet rather controversial thing. In order to make a company or an industry thrive, we ought to make sure that we have a sufficient level of management in it. Consequently, in order to help the Ukrainian economy, we should concentrate on management. Without a skillful manager and a passionate leader, there is little chance of rearranging the whole economic system of the country. The necessity of sufficient level of management becomes especially vivid when an organization faces severe ordeals or even crises. At this point, it is appropriate to remind everyone of the Great Depression and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The policy of the 32nd President of the USA was rather authoritarian, forcing banking institutions to go on mandatory holidays, the regulation of the production, the devaluation of the dollar, and the imposing social policies. Obviously, it went through a lot of criticism. However, such a way of ruling enabled the country to get out of the Great Depression. What would happen if all of the influential figures, in fact, managers of different kinds, were taught to be ingenious, to take bold decisions, and to stay cool-headed, as Roosevelt was? Well, in all likelihood, we would have a perfectly synergized and organized and productive society led by people who know exactly how to be leaders and how to lead an organization to success. Unfortunately, Ukraine is not ready yet for such dramatic changes, which boils down to two main aspects. First, a conservative mindset of the citizens, and second, a lack of consideration of and concentration on the field of management on a legislation level. Let me quickly explain them to you. To visualize the first problem, I'll tell you a story about my life, which happened to me last year. It pushed me to study my field of expertise more. Last year, I met a neighbor in an elevator. He asked me what I major in, and proudly I answered management. And you should have seen my face after his reaction. He said that it's not a profession and you don't need to study in order to become a manager. The sad story shows how the majority of Ukrainians perceive management. Such misperception has its basis. Until 1991, Ukraine was a part of the USSR, in which there was no such a specialization as management. Furthermore, it was assumed as something from the West, which was considered rather evil and inappropriate for the society. This led to the following. The older generations perceive a tendency to managerial education as something unnecessary, useless, and artificial. They believe that to become a manager, you should first be a specialist in some other field and then be simply promoted to rule. And moreover, they are highly likely to teach their children in the same way, so that even younger generations do not acknowledge the importance of managerial education. Now we can switch to the other problem, which is the legislation. In general, legislation of Ukraine has always been turning a blind eye to management and its importance in the well-being of the country. We should kick off by stating that there is no such an act in the legislation of Ukraine in which it is possible to read a definition of the profession of manager. However, what plays an even greater role and matters more is the fact that there are no criteria identified in the legislation of Ukraine which a manager should meet in order to work legally. It means that anyone might be promoted to manage an organization, even if they don't have a necessary qualification. The mentioned criteria are identified legally for such professions as a doctor, a teacher, an advocate, but not for a manager. Don't you think it's unfair? With all of that in mind, I'll provide you with some solutions for the discussed problems. And let's start with the legislation. First and foremost, it is vital to define clearly some primary aspects of management on a legal level. What is such a profession as a manager? What are their rights and responsibilities? What do they do according to their job? Answers to all of those questions should be provided in the law of Ukraine. In addition, the necessity of the according education must be highlighted. Secondly, the legislation of Ukraine should have a law about professionalization of management. At this point, we must consider two aspects: the educationalist institutions, like schools and colleges, and the education of the society. In terms of the first one, we can see that educational institutions, I must admit universities notwithstanding, do not present their students with the management education. What could and should be done to it is identify in the legislation clearly all of the conditions of teaching managerial field in schools and colleges. Those must include a step-by-step instruction of how to incorporate those studies into the learning process, the definition of qualifications, skills, and knowledge which students must obtain, and finally, ways of punishment in case of non-fulfillment of the law. Undeniably, the ones presenting the information to the students must have necessary education. In addition, it is crucial to talk about the evaluation of the studies. It must be stated that an assessment is obligatory. However, a detailed way of assessing, including standards, including sample tests and topics which must be covered, will be a responsibility of another institution, which is the National Committee of Management. The necessity of creating such an organization will be discussed further. And before going further, I want you all to do one thing. Let's breathe out together and breathe down, so that we are relaxed and ready to move on. I guess we are ready now. The second aspect of the law about professionalization of management should cover education of the society. The government ought to take actions in order to fill up gaps in people's perception of management. The easiest yet essential way, which should be done in order to overcome the said problem, is organizing public speeches, lectures, conferences, roundtables about management all across Ukraine. Furthermore, such events should be also incorporated in every company system. Secondly, the government should also support the educational process by inviting well-known specialists of the field and successful managers from all around the world in order to give public speeches and lectures for the society. The all around the world, which I said, includes Ukraine as well, so that Ukrainian specialists also contribute to the educational process. And last but not the least, the government should create and promote social campaigns. These might include brochures, billboards, indoors and outdoors advertisement, and many more. And I've already mentioned the necessity of creating the National Committee of Management. Can you guess what such structure is? Well, the National Committee of Management will be in charge of all of the governmental decisions in the field, in the managerial field. The organization will be permanently analyzing the state of management in the country, all of the upsides and downsides of the business processes. By doing so, it will collect data about them. And this will enable the committee to give educated advice to the government on which area, both geographical and economical, to devote more money to, or on the other hand, which area should be shortened in financing and examined on the efficiency of administration. Furthermore, the committee will have a responsibility of consulting enterprises of the different fields of economy on various ordeals which they might encounter. This help should be free for the enterprises and therefore also sponsored by the government. Another function of the National Committee of Management will be planning in details all of the educational programs in the country, for schools, colleges, universities, the society. The organization will be as well in charge of the standards of evaluation of the studies. These standards will be given up to the educational institutions in order to measure their students' progress and knowledge. And I guess by this point, at least half of you have already forgotten about the second problem about management in the country, which is the perception of the society towards it. From one side, being initially obliged to follow the laws which were discussed, the majority of people will soon adjust to them and change their perception of management. From the other side, without the support of the masses, including politician parties which will vote for such reforms, it is impossible to implement the said changes into the everyday life of the society. That's why I firmly believe that the correct mindset of the citizens will be built up gradually and evolutionary, of course, with the help of the governmental campaigns. Steve Jobs, Apple. Carlos Ghosn, Nissan. Samuel Palmisano, IBM. Those are just 3 examples of how changes to efficient management save enterprises. But of course, there are many more. It is high time that we think outside the box. Nowadays, world requires extraordinary ways of overcoming problems. Ordeals in the economy is not only about the economy itself. We should cure the disease of the poor state of it by looking at the causes, not by considering only the symptoms. Let's develop management state of Ukraine together, so that no other students like me were laughed at in an elevator. Thank you.
Good day. My name is Anastasia. I study at Odesa State Agrarian University. I am very nervous because this is my first performance in English. I just recently started learning English, so this performance is very important step for me and the beginning for something new. Today, one of the most pressing problems of humanity in the reconstruction of post-war Ukrainian. Therefore, it is necessary to develop plans for its reconstruction now. On February 24, 2022, Russia launched full-scale invasion on Ukraine. It was the most terrifying morning in my life. Since then, lives in Ukraine have changed dramatically. Many cities and infrastructure facilities have been destroyed by the Russian army and need to be rebuilt. At dawn on June 7, 2023, the Russia blew in the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. This provided electric and fresh water to southern Ukrainian, communicating war crime and potential in the ecosite. This plan also affects opinion on the current on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. About 80 settlements were in flood zone. The city Kherson and the right bank of the Kherson region were potentially flooded. The temporary occupation town of Oleshka on the left bank in the Kherson region is almost completely underwater. Almost the house in the settlement were flooded, but people were made there. The situation in Hola Pristan was elementary difficult. People and animals were in great danger. Most people tried to evacuate, but they were set on the roof of the house because they could not evacuate. This story is very close to me. At the time, I was on the occupation part of Kherson region. It was a very crazy morning. At that time, I felt like I was transported to the morning on February 24. It was very scary. Hola Pristan is very close, was flooded. We hoped that the water would not reach us. But looking at the pictures of the aftermath and seen in your native place is very hard. My heart just broke and I had happy memories of those plants which were flooded with water. It was especially painful to see people trying to save themselves. This event has many consequences. Many people died as a result of this event. But the exact data will be known only after the deoccupation of the territories. A region on the three regions will not work without water from Kakhovka reservoirs. As a result of the expansion of the Kakhovka hydrical power plant, water supply 31 irrigation systems in the fields of Dniprovska, Khersonska and Zaporizhzhia region will be stopped. In 2021, this system provided irrigations for 5,084 hectares, where Ukrainian farmers harvested 584 million tons of grain. Hectares from these Ukrainian farmers harvest about 4 million tons of grains and oilseeds, worth about $1.5 million. The destruction on the Kakhovka hydrical power plant will be linked to the fact on the South Ukrainian might turn into desert next year. The regions where its main products of vegetables and fruits in our country, as well as oilseed and grains. Experts say the cultives of some types of oilseed and grains, as well as vegetables in the region, can be forgotten for several years. This will bring very large losses. The expansion on the Kakhovka hydrical power plant sought a large-scale improved discharge in the future. Aquatic bioresource and the reservoir of Kakhovka, Dnipro, Mykolaiv and the regions may be without water. It will also be impossible of failure restore the opinion on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant after its deoccupation, because its filling and the cooling point depend on the water level in the Kakhovka reservoir. Arising in these consequences, we can say the reconstruction of the Kakhovka hydrical power plant is very important for our country. But it will not be easy. Many experts initially believed what is not possible. I also believe that we can do it. We will build a much better and more powerful hydrical power plant. Canada and the United States will be helped with this. The reconstruction of the hydrical power plant will cost $1 million and will take 5 years. At the moment, we can only develop a plan for the reconstruction of the Kakhovka hydrical power plant. We will be able to start the reconstruction itself only after the occupation of the territory where the Kakhovka hydrical power plant is located. Therefore, it is very important to make sure this happens as soon as possible. Thank you.
Use this experience to fuel your aspirations. Be part of the change. Let's explore, learn, and grow together. Secure your spot now.